Tradia is an episode that returns us to the familiar setting of Rainbow Falls, shown in the Rainbow Falls episode Rainbow Falls, and its description led me to believe this episode would be about Spike, at least in some part, but the only part that Spike has to play in this episode is the start of it when he has the Power Ponies comic, which is a nice callback to a decent episode of Season 4. This season has thankfully only had one Spike episode, which was actually surprisingly good, because in the past, Spike episodes are less than good. Now let's get started. Tradia is primarily about something called the Rainbow Falls Traders Exchange, which is kind of like a car boot sale, selling off items, but instead of the primary currency being money, it's other items of value. Twilight is there in a formal capacity to oversee the trading and make sure everything runs smoothly. It's great to see Twilight in this kind of way, as she's not really gotten much exposure as a princess this season. But then again, we don't need it, because the season opener did a pretty good job of answering all of our questions anyway. This episode has three divergent plotlines, with three duos of characters, Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy, Rarity and Applejack, and Twilight and Pinkie Pie. Each is as interesting as the other, and has its own moral to teach. Pinkie Pie is helping Twilight get rid of some books that are cluttering the library, because Princess Celestia sends her too many. And come on, who's ever heard of too many books? But Pinkie won't let them be traded, because apparently being from Princess Twilight adds value to them, and no one has an item of any equal value. In the end, Twilight ends up keeping the books because of some continuity and nostalgia from a certain episode. You know, there's a point when collecting becomes hoarding, and while these books may have psychological value, they are no longer useful to Twilight, and instead of being practical and smart, she's being idiotic and sappy and wasting room in her library because she can't seem to let go.
Let it go, let it go.
Now let's talk about Rainbow and Fluttershy. This particular section of the episode reminds me of the Legend of Zelda series, in which Link, in many of the installments, has to go around the game world and trade many items for an item of which he needs. We're going to talk about the Ocarina of Time game, where he has to obtain the Big Goron sword. He obtains an assortment of items from all over, a cuckoo to a mystery potion, from a frog to eye drops, eventually ending in him obtaining the item he wants. In this case, Rainbow Dash plans out all her trades, and ends up trading Fluttershy into slavery. Yeah, that happens. And I guess the lesson is that friends are more important than anything. Fluttershy gives up her bear call to get Rainbow Dash to the bookstall in time. But the great thing about Rainbow Dash is that she gives up the book to get Fluttershy her bird whistle instead, which is very kind of her. Third and finally is Rarity and Applejack. This relates to the people who think that their stuff is more important than someone else's. Applejack is the type that trades for small advantages, whereas Rarity is a collector of items that are almost exactly the same. I thought of this like all connoisseurs of Apple devices, but let's move on. This plotline is interesting to me because I like seeing the interaction between Rarity's interest in aesthetics and Applejack's lack thereof, and how they clash. It happens more often than you'd think. Oh, I guess I should add something about how this relates to me. You see, I have a friend who's a lot like Rarity in the sense that he cares a lot about aesthetics, whereas I am more practical. I don't really have as much of a care about looks as he does. So it concludes with the two compromising and getting half of the pooled resources, with which they get something for the other. Though the battle is done, the war is far from over. So overall, this episode is entertaining. It adds little to the world of the show, but it has us return to Rainbow Falls, which is a nice touch. And I'm going to just forego the rating system. My opinion on this episode is pretty clear. 7 out of 10.
Will you trade a lamp for my horseshoe so I can trade it for an Orthros and get my book?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!